to DBS 2021 virtual event. We are starting now with the workshop presented by WorldDAB, Building Radio Audiences with DAB+. The session is joined by speakers from WorldDAB and their industry partners. Please welcome Dr. Sabel, Chairman of WorldDAB Asia Pacific Technical Group, and S-Comm Technologies, who is going to introduce the session and the panel of speakers.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the WorldDAB workshop on building radio audiences with DAB+. We've got quite a distinguished panel of speakers today. We've only got a limited time and we've got a lot of ground to cover. So I'll just introduce the speakers as they come. But we do have Joan Warner, CEO of Commercial Radio Australia and Chair and Vice President of WorldDAB. We have Patrick Hannon, who's the President of WorldDAB and VP Corporate Development, Frontier Smart Technologies. We have Lindsay Cornell, Principal Systems Architect at BBC R&D. Myself, Ron Schiffelers, who's a Senior Director Program Management at NXP Semiconductors. And also Albert Tseng, who's the CEO of Keystone Semiconductors. So quite a range we're going to cover today, and we're going to talk about how we can help build radio audiences. So with that, I think I will pass to Joan Warner, who is going to give us a welcome and update on Asia Pacific. Thanks, Joan. You're on, Joan.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Welcoming you. Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Mine today is quite easy. I'm simply welcoming people to the workshop. There's lots more technical work and technical information that we'll be giving coming to this workshop. DAB Plus digital radio is about planning for the future. And we all know that we're and look for different ways of doing things. One thing there will always be a place for radio in our world. And what we do, not only through the COVID pandemic, but throughout some very bad floods that we've had recently and bushfires before that, that radio is one of the prime broadcast radio is one of the prime means of going on. Broadcast radio is very hard to replace, but we need to update it and we need to have the latest technology. And DAB Plus gives us that latest broadcast technology. So there's even a little bit is going on, even though COVID is keeping us all in our home countries and in our homes or cities. But March 2021, Radio Days Asia, a virtual event, will be 24th to 25th of March and will be radio. In April, we have the ABU, which is where we are now broadcasting Symposium, the virtual event. June, we've got broadcasting second half of 21, there will be WorldDAB and ABU technical webinar series on a whole range of issues to do with DAB+. Now, as you know, is our new World Group has a very important role in Asia. It's dedicated to assisting the broadcast industry in this region to implement DAB+. It's much, and at that meeting we had some good updates from Vietnam, Myanmar, Thailand, and Cambodia. We also had presentations from members of World Head-End Systems. Now, I'd like to say here as the Vice President for the Asia Pacific that this group is meant to provide technical support and assistance to anyone in the Asia Pacific region is thinking about DAB+ need. Is it technical? Is it policy? Is it getting hold of equipment? So this group is there to always on call for anybody that needs any. Please use this group. It's here to help. It's here to give practical, on-the-ground support. And if we just some key highlights from some of the APAC region, and I won't read through all of these slides because I believe the slides will be made available later. 77% of new cars are now sold with DAB+. That's up from 60% in 2018. Our DAB+ enabled 2020 is up 27% year on year. Now, in Australia, what we found, and during the time when we in Australia were locked down, another piece of good news from Australia is our first major highway tunnels to support and October 20. And now in our biggest city, new motor tunnels to be equipped. Thailand, Bangkok, DAB+ trial continues. Thailand on DAB+ for some time and has been working very closely. 20-month trial commenced in 2019 with 11 radio stations, and of course that trial is still underway in Bangkok for a further 3 years, which is good news, although what we'd like is move to permanent services of DAB+. Vietnam, there's a DAB+ trial on air in Hannon. The Hanoi trial is full-time, but the Ho Chi Minh trial is part-time, and the trials are made up of 16 DAB+ evaluated. And here's where WorldDAB can help regarding the unexpected coverage results. WorldDAB was able to come in with some technical assistance to ensure full coverage. Now, EOV, Voice of Vietnam, initially aimed to convert radio from analogue to digital by 2025. However, as we know, COVID has delayed many things in many places in the world, and that objective looks like being pushed back a little bit further. Malaysia, for Malaysia, MCMC has asked for input. We know Television Malaysia has responded, but yet we've had no public announcements or information. Again, WorldDAB stands ready to assist the Malaysian government and regulator. And Indonesia is very good news from there recently. RRI has re-established contact after a fairly long period of silence with WorldDAB. DTV has been deployed. We're now looking at how we can digitise radio in that very far-flung country on the 23rd of March, and we're hoping to get out of the Indonesian government and RRI over the next few. Sri Lanka, there's no updates. Again, you know, in some of these areas we have some political issues happening, and then COVID on top, then we would expansion beyond the capital of Yangon. Again, we have some political issues there that I think need to be resolved before WorldDAB can go in and assist the broadcast on the current status. But CRA, on behalf of WorldDAB, did hold discussions with the mass media in July 2019. There's a lot of interest in knowing we're precluded from travelling there, have the face-to-face meetings that we need to have. All in Papua New Guinea, they are all interested to understand more about DAB. Now, some of these countries are fairly new to better understand KPIs and costs. Again, slow progress because we can't be on the ground, but we are having possible giving them the information that they need to move forward. New Zealand, they are in a probably a stop position. The Radio Broadcasters Association is still looking at capital and operational costs under a range 20. That has not been completed because a number of things happening in New Zealand, not the least of which was a terrorist attack and the COVID issue. So that's just a very quick update from me. on where we're up to in the APAC region. Please, when I say that WorldDAB wants to help, WorldDAB is here to help. All the people on this call are here to help. In the APAC region, not so much as he'd like to be at the moment, get on a plane and travel. So thank you much, and thank you for attending our seminar today.
Thank you very much, Joan, for that great roundup. Absolutely right. We certainly want to get out there, but it's just a matter of the realities of the situation. So we do what we can virtually, and I'll talk a bit more about that technical group and what we can do to help shortly. But now we have a global update and the business case for DAB Plus from our president, Patrick Hannon. So I'll hand straight over to you, please, Patrick. Welcome, and over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Les, and thank you, Joan, for that really useful update on the Asia Pacific region. Am my slide sharing okay?
Yes, all good.
Yep. Okay, great. As Les says, this is a global update and the case for DAB+. So let's start where we are today. Well, the good news is 2020 was a good year for DAB+. And what do I mean by that? Well, basically, DAB+ is now established as the core future platform for radio in Europe. And as you can see from this map, the dark blue territories are well-established markets, green are new markets, and light blue are the trial territories. So very much established as a core platform for radio in Europe. We're seeing strong progress in major markets, the UK, Germany, Italy, and as we've just heard from Joan, record levels of digital listening in Australia. And the big breakthrough for the European market this year is the launch of national DAB+ in France. They already have 10 cities on air, but the national network is due to launch sometime between July and October of 2021. So that's what's going on at a country level. But what about receivers? So two slides here. The first is about cars. So the European Union has passed a directive which came into effect in December of last year. And that requires all new car radios anywhere within the European Union to be able to receive digital terrestrial radio. Okay, and that came in at the end of last year. In practice, DAB+ is the standard of choice. We're talking about 15 million cars a year that are sold in Europe. And then if we broaden that to include both consumer and automotive, we can see that DAB receivers are now truly mass market. Combining those two groups, over 90 million receivers have been sold to date, and that's up to the middle of last year. And when I say mass market, that means for the consumer receivers, prices are now available from $20. And with that platform, you know, the established European markets, Australia, the affordable receivers, we're now in a position really to expand internationally. And I won't go into lots of detail on this, but we've got services and trials in North Africa, South Africa, the Middle East, and we've just heard from Joan, quite a bit of activity taking place in the Asia Pacific region. So the question is, what's driving these changes? Why are people pursuing DAB+? Well, the number one reason is greater choice. On average, countries have 6 times as many national services on DAB or DAB+ as they do on FM. So much greater choice for listeners. And to give you an example of how that works in practice, Absolute Radio, very well-known station in the UK, but it was just a single station on analog radio. They now have 7 stations. So they launched 6 new stations, 60s, 70s, etc. So that is innovation. And you might go, well, that's great, but so what? Well, the so what, they tripled their audience in 7 years. So DAB gives opportunities to innovate, and that can translate to audience growth. But some people might say, but that's great, but that's competition. And Absolute Radio may have done very well, but what about me as an incumbent broadcaster? Well, I think the key point here, as illustrated from the UK, over the last 6 years, so between 2013 and 2019, UK radio revenues grew by over 30%. So the key point here, and the national brands were a key part of that story. So the key point here is that the whole advertising cake is growing. People are worried about competition. Well, it's up to you to compete, but the cake is getting bigger. And at the same time, DAB+ offers significantly lower distribution costs. When you look at an individual service, it varies depending on the geography and the territory, but roughly speaking, you're talking about 80% lower cost for distributing DAB and DAB+. And that translates into to DAB being the green solution. So DAB+ consumes significantly less energy than FM. And we've always known that, but the BBC conducted a survey last year, and it showed that even though there were more stations, DAB was 33% more efficient than FM. So it really is the environmental choice. DAB is also reliable in times of emergency. Now, there are lots of different ways you can do emergency warnings, but perhaps one of the simplest is alarm announcements. And these are part of the DAB+ minimum specification. And what happens here is that if there's an emergency and somebody's listening to the radio, then the radio will automatically switch to the emergency audio service, which is on the same multiplex. So that is, particularly in the Asia Pacific region, I know that there's strong interest in that emergency capability. And then the final point I want to make is that DAB+ is key to securing radio's long-term position in the car. So if you look at WorldDAB's members, we encompass broadcasters, network operators, but also the automotive sector. And just to give you some of the names, Audi, BMW, Daimler, General Motors, Honda, Hyundai, Jaguar Land Rover, Stellantis, which may be unfamiliar to some of you, but that's Fiat, Chrysler, Peugeot, and Citroën, Toyota, and Volvo. All of those people are involved in WorldDAB and are active participants in the WorldDAB Automotive Working Group, which is all about optimizing the in-car DAB+ experience. So that group has been working for about 4 or 5 years now, and the improvements we've been able to make to the in-car experience are significant. But we're also looking to the future, and in particular, hybrid radio or smart radio, where you're combining both broadcast and IP. And the key point here is that the broadcasters, the network operators, and the car makers are all working together to make this a success. And how do we achieve success? Well, we have a very simple, clear strategic framework, which we call the 5 C's. So these are the key building blocks to successful digital radio. Number 1, you have to have coverage, and we're talking here major cities and the major road networks. Number 2 is content. We need to make sure that the content proposition is significantly stronger than what is available on FM. Number 3, consumer devices. Well, we've seen that we now have mass market devices available from $20. Cars, as I've said, all new cars in Europe, all new car radios must have digital terrestrial, and so that means that all the car makers now can offer DAB+. And finally, communication. Here we're talking about communicating to consumers to make them aware of the benefits of DAB+, but also communicating to retailers, because they're the ones who are going to be selling the receivers. So those are the 5 C's, absolutely essential to get each of those in place. And then it's all underpinned by collaboration. I gave the example in the car industry. That applies right across the board. Getting all the stakeholders to work together, recognizing the mutual interest, that's the key to success. So to conclude, 3 key takeaways. Number 1, DAB Plus is extending its international footprint, and we're able to do that because we've sold over 90 million receivers in consumer and automotive, number 1. Number 2, significant benefits to listeners, broadcasters, and society. And finally, now is the time for action. As I said, collaboration is key to success. Thank you very much.
I'll take myself off mute. Thank you, Patrick, for that excellent presentation. I'd just like to pick up on your communication point and the mantra of collaborate, compete on content and collaborate on technology. And we've certainly found that works in Australia. And I think we've seen it work time and time again in Europe. And I think that's how the Middle East will make it happen as well. So it seems to be the way to go, let's say. It really makes it happen. So that's great. Okay, moving on from business case and status, we'll move now to technical. And as most people will know, WorldDAB is very fastidious in moving the standards along and making sure that digital radio is fit for purpose as time moves on. So we have next Lindsay Cornell, who's the chair of the technical committee at WorldDAB and knows all things standards. So Lindsay, please, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Les. Yes, I'm here to give you an update on the DAB standards. I'm just going to touch on 3 topics. You've heard about all of these a little bit already in the presentations so far. So in terms of receiver testing, one of the key issues about rolling out a new technology is making sure that consumers can access devices that really work, that really reflect the benefits of the standards that's been implemented. And now for a couple of years, the DAB standard, the ETSI standard TS 103461, has become basically the industry benchmark for receiver testing. It describes requirements, the minimum requirements for radios, and it includes tests both for the core technology, for the chips or the modules that go into the radios and the radios themselves. But since it was originally published in 2017, there have been some developments to the standards. There's the new EU directive that Patrick was talking about concerning new cars, and DAB has been expanding outside of Europe into new markets, and that meant that an update was needed. The technical committee in WorldDAB completed the process to review the standard and to update it, and the new version was published in October of last year. The changes are in fact quite small because the changes to the underlying standards were quite small, but what they do is they bring the standard right up to date, and they are made to all 3 sections of the document. One of the key areas is to do with this expansion outside Europe, and indeed the expansion within Europe to a less degree, because we have this concept of regional profiles, which allows the standard to adapt itself to fit with the local market. And as Patrick was saying, DAB in vehicles is now mandated by the European Union and its member states through this thing called the EECC. And within the official languages of the European Union, there are languages written in Latin script, but also in the Greek script and the Cyrillic script. And therefore, we needed to reflect that into this standard, how to make sure that a radio that was fit for the whole market would work in that way. We also made sure that there was a test incorporated into the minimum requirements for the emergency alarm announcements. That wasn't there before. And again, because of the expansion radio receivers being distributed more widely, people traveling from one place to another, we also have enhanced the testing for service following, because a couple of issues came up of slightly strange behavior, because the same codes were being interpreted, not the whole identification was being used. So all of those things have been added into the standard, and this will ensure that the chipsets and the modules that are produced for all products in the future will be able to deliver these more international benefits, the non-Latin texts and the emergency announcements. So that text handling that I was talking about, it's divided into a couple of documents. All of the signaling and the concepts are contained in this standard here, and a new version was published in August 2020, and it defines this signaling layer, the framework that allows us to convey non-Latin text. There's an extra signaling field which has complexity indicators, and we have this concept of regional profiles, and they can be set up by individual markets, defining the framework under which text is sent by the broadcaster and then received and displayed, because the key issue is the radio is sold and it has a certain kind of capability. To include all the scripts for the entire world would cost a lot of money because you need more storage space. Actually, most of the time, most radios, they wouldn't be using all of that. So in order to produce these low-cost receivers, but effective for each market, we have this process of the text. There are 4 profiles defined. There's the basic Latin profile. Then there's the All Europe profile, which includes the Greek and Cyrillic scripts. We have the ASBU, the Arab States Broadcasting Union profile, which is Arabic and Latin. And we also have a profile for Thai. Joan was talking about the expansion in Thailand. Thailand has worked, the Thai authorities have worked with us to define a Thai profile. So all of these things are now codified and inside this specification. The last thing I want to touch on is hybrid radio, and that's an area which is fast developing, particularly in Europe. But what we also want to do is to make sure that DAB is the backbone of the radio experience, delivering the vast majority of connections serving the big audiences. And what's been added now to this specification, which is for hybrid radio, it covers all of the digital radio standards that are openly specified at ETSI. And it permits broadcasters to specify some more detailed geolocation information for the IP bearer. The broadcast bearer, of course, has a fixed coverage area defined by the transmitters via the transmission network. But for IP, it could be that the signal is picked up anywhere. But it may be that you have content which is rights limited, so the sporting event you're only allowed to show within your broadcast coverage area. You may be that you wish to minimize the energy footprint and the costs of distributing. We know from the studies that BBC did that IP distribution adds cost, and if you can already reach those consumers with the broadcast coverage, that would be the best platform to use. So with this new geolocation information, you can specify where the IP bearer can be received or not received. And again, this is published last year. So collectively, putting all these things together, we're really building and maintaining the standards base and making sure that the experiences that have happened in the European core are available to everybody throughout the world. So thank you very much for your time. I'll hand back to you, Les. And you're on mute again.
There we go, back again. Yeah, thank you very much, Lindsay. That's great. I think it's a really good demonstration of how WorldDAB, sees situations as they unfold, and we're first in to actually address them and fix issues to make things better as time goes by. And there will be no doubt plenty more coming as time goes by. And I highlighted a couple of those in my previous presentation around some of the hybrid and the smart radio aspects. So always something to keep us busy. Okay, I think it's my turn now. So I'm now going to do a short presentation on the support for broadcasters in the Asia Pacific region. And this really revolves around what Joan talked about earlier, the Asia Pacific Technical Group, which has been specifically set up to help broadcasters in this region. We've had 2 meetings, so let's just go through a few things that we do, what we are, how we operate, some recent activities, and what's next. So first of all, the group was set up, and we had some pretty strong membership. In fact, we have over 50 members, probably closer to 60 from, I think it's 18 different countries. So strong membership. It's done on a voluntary basis, and you don't need to be a member, or your organization doesn't need to be a member of WorldDAB. And we have some terms of reference. If you'd like to read them, they are available from the WorldDAB website. So how do we work? Well, we have regular teleconference meetings. We currently have 3 scheduled each year. Each one's about 2 hours. We'd like one to be face-to-face, but obviously that's not possible, certainly not this year, hopefully next year. Possibly even associated with the ABU DBS, because it's always a good turnout when we have a physical meeting. And we cover a range of topics, and those topics are really up to what the membership wants. So, always open to get guest presenters, and in fact, that's exactly what happened at the meeting we had previously in March. We had some Asia Pacific country updates. So we talk about how things are progressing in terms of field testing or trials and other things. We had some guest presentations on head-end systems from Panida and IZT. That got a lot of questions. And I did a little presentation on the DAB Plus adoption process, which I'll give you some highlights for in a moment. We always have a round table where we can discuss whatever we want. And those presentations from that second meeting will be made available along with the minutes of the meeting this month after we've got through the DBS. So if you join now. I'll give you the details shortly. And we'd be very pleased to have you attend these meetings with us. So let's just talk about the DAB adoption process. And why am I bringing that up? Well, it seems that there's a lot of newer countries that are really considering DAB Plus in the Asia Pacific. And what was apparent from the first meeting we had last November was that the actual process you need to go through was quite unclear to these new adopters. Obviously we have countries like Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, who are reasonably well down the track, and I'd call them phase 2 out of 7. And I see 7 distinct phases in the adoption process. So let's just walk through those for a moment. The first one is initial investigations and research. This is where a country or an organization within a country wants to know more about digital broadcasting. They want to get a good understanding of what digital radio or DAB Plus can provide, the features, the business case, the design and the construction. And ongoing education. And WorldDAB provides a number of events that help this, and some of those are the ASBU and the ABU webinar series that we do. Webinars at the moment, it used to be a week-long hands-on workshop in KL. Hopefully we'll get back to that. Anyway, that gives a really good basis to know how DAB Plus works. Once you've got that and you understand what it can do and why you want to do it, you can then start technical trials. And that's certainly where Thailand is well down the track of that. Vietnam, Malaysia's done trials. Indonesia's got three sites running as well. And that really gives the opportunity to get even, good hands-on experience to improve the understanding and expand knowledge for system planning and design. You get out there and do field testing, understand what the environment does to the signal, how far the signals reach, what happens to metadata in awkward positions with low field strength, for example. All these things are really, really useful for planning. And often those trials can go on to be pre-permanent services, because it's always good to help establish the market. Pardon me. And I think particularly with cars now and the European directives, what we're going to see is countries will have cars imported with DAB already there, and that will help preload the audience, we might say. Okay, so trials are really, really important and a very, very good way to move forward. So once we get through technical trials, we'll get into formal adoption. And that's when the government actually does legislation or regulation to formally adopt the standard in the country, and that then allows the broadcasters to obtain licenses to operate those broadcast services. So that's a very important thing. And there's a lot of support within the WorldDAB community to assist with different models that can be used for such licensing and regulation. Now, in parallel with a lot of this, we can do planning. Now, there's a lot to plan. What services are required in which areas. And it's not just existing services in AM and FM. It's new additional digital only services. And we heard Patrick talk about it's typical to have up to 6 times the number of services when you go to DAB. And that gives a lot more choice to the audience, and that keeps radio fresh. In Australia, we have 3 to 4 times the number of services. Of course, in planning, you also have to design the systems so you can actually understand the cost of implementation and the timing of that implementation. And that turns out into phase 5, which is the rollout, where you actually go to construct the DAB system. And this is often done in a phased approach. We start with the bigger cities first, is normal, and then gradually the secondary cities, and then national plans for across the country, main road and highway coverage is always very important as well. And there also is the time when a lot of additional content is developed. Of course, during that rollout, you have to position your receivers, get the marketing right so the audience, the public, know what's coming, what they're going to get, and how they can get it. So, that's the hard yards. And I would say during those planning and rollout phases, not only plan for your standard broadcast, plan for your smart radio rollout as well. So plan for hybrid radio, and that will be much more cost effective and impactful when you do that. So once we've got our rollout going and we've got some operations out there, we go into an operational phase. And that's where we go into technical operations and maintenance, content production of audio, and that all-important metadata, the images, the text, the links, the taglines, the interactivity, and so forth. And ongoing marketing. What we find is you don't gain the entire audience in one go. It takes several years. So we need to keep that marketing flow from time to time. And ongoing cross-industry support, because remember, it's not just broadcasters, it's equipment providers, receiver manufacturers, content providers, and so forth. And finally, you might get to phase 7, which is the analog switch off. Now, we have Norway's done that already a couple of years ago, and that turned out to be a very successful switch off, and they're now reaping all the benefits of lower power consumption, green technology, all the additional services. We seem to just keep building and building, and the listening keeps going up. You can do that planning up front, or you can actually do it later on. It's usually done a little later once you've actually got a rollout ongoing and a significant audience. And we see that with Switzerland, which is planning to do that analog switch off in 22 to 23 to 24, and other countries are considering that in Europe as well at the moment. So all in all, there's these 7 phases, and here's a little Gantt chart with a couple of lines there which says rollout and operations could go on for some time. But what I really want to emphasize here is the overlap of each of those different activities. Now, we can see here, in fact, that initial investigations and research can be ongoing while we're doing technical trials, formal adoption, and planning. And this is not unusual, it's quite normal. There's a lot of activities to be done, and a lot of different parts of the organizations need to get involved. Okay, so back to the APAC technical group. This is the sort of stuff that we can help people with. All of those topics, we can provide assistance. We have a 3rd meeting coming up, roughly scheduled for July, and there will be more information coming out on that in the next month or so. As I mentioned before, the minutes and the presentations from meeting 2 will be available in April. And if you'd like to join and participate, please do, and contact the WorldDAB project office at the contact page, or you can email me directly on my email, and I will be very, very happy to assist your invitation and participation. So with that, I say thank you, and we're going to move now on to receivers. Our next presenter is Ron Schiffelers from NXP. He is going to give us a presentation about how NXP chips can help the automotive industry, and I'm sure they're already doing that, Ron. So I'm really looking forward to this one. So over to you, please.
Okay, thank you, Les. Yeah, definitely. I'm going to talk about chips in cars and getting DAB plus into the cars. And cars are a very important aspect for radio in general, as also explained in some previous presentations by Patrick and by Joan, I think. You're on the move in the car, and in the car, radio or audio listening is still the #1 entertainment that people direct to when they're moving across the roads. And that's also what Patrick said. It's very important to get coverage along the national highways and the major roads. That's a very important one. But how do you make a radio in the car, and what makes it different? The first thing I want to say is, who is NXP? We're a semiconductors company, so we develop chips. We're a big company. We've had like 60 years of experience. We come from the Philips family way back. We're active in operations in more than 30 countries, and we have almost 30,000 employees. And we are the #1 company in automotive. Yeah, and automotive means many things, but one of the big things and big businesses that we are in is infotainment in automotive. And then I want to jump to, what does it mean to have DAB plus or radio in a car? Is it different from a consumer radio? Because you could think like, yeah, we have these consumer solutions, just put it in the car. It won't work. It really won't work. It's very much different. We have to deal with so many different circumstances, like physical circumstances. It has to operate at -40 degrees Celsius, but it also has to operate up to 105 degrees Celsius. And it's not because somewhere in the world it will be 105 degrees Celsius because of the weather, but if the sun is shining on the roof of a car and the receiver module is mounted right underneath the roof, it can get very hot in those places in the car. And we have to make sure that at these extreme conditions, the radio is still receiving as you expect it to receive under a 20 degrees circumstance, for example. Lifetime is an important one because your car will be there for many, many years. And for all these many years, you want the car radio to function. So also the lifetime requirements towards the chips into a car are very stringent. Now, while driving around, you don't want to be distracted, not from an audio perspective, not the way you use your radio. It needs to be intuitive. It needs to be simple. It needs to be distraction-free, because you don't want to crash into somebody else while you're driving around because you heard something strange happening. And that means that you have to have things like service following, uniform service list, and these kind of things, because you can receive DAB, you can receive still analog radio, but also IP for hybrid radio, as was mentioned before. Now, that driving around itself also makes things more challenging. You drive around, you come to a broadcast tower, and you think, okay, that's nice, but you're still receiving a broadcast from a tower somewhere further away. So you have a very weak signal that you still want to be able to receive next to a power station or broadcast station that is broadcasting under very high energy levels. You have Doppler effects, you have multipath, which is constantly changing because you're driving around. So you can imagine that the way you have to build a car radio receiver is completely different than compared to a consumer radio. Lead times are a very specific one. You see at the bottom of the slide over here that there is 3 stages more or less in the receiver design. You have the chip design, you have the tier 1, which is like Harman or Visteon or Aptiv, or LG, these kind of companies who develop the infotainment system, and that then finally goes into the OEM car development cycle, like Audi, Volkswagen, BMW, these kind of companies. And that takes a long time from the idea that in the chip companies we have and defining our chips. It takes about 6 to 7 years until you find it back on the road, because you have these development cycles, you have the validation cycles, the field testing, and all that kind of things going on before you see it driving around on the road. So that also means that in the semiconductor companies, we have to think ahead in time quite a bit. You have your specific use cases when you make your radio architectures while driving around. I will come back on that, and also the global platforms, because also their automotive industry is quite particular. Now let's have a look into these 2 things. If you think back of radio in the car, it has been there a long time. 100 years back, we had the first receiver in the cars, and that was AM. And I think we all know what AM reception means, and it looked very funny at those times. You had huge antennas on your car, but over time, about 100 years ago, we really started developing, and it took a long time before FM came, somewhere around the 70s, where it really became popular. And you see, without going into all the details, that a car radio receiver became more and more complex. And the question is why? Well, it has to do with those use cases that I mentioned before. When you drive around, you want to constantly get, for example, an update of your station list. You want to know which kind of stations are available. And that changes because you're driving around, you're moving away from one broadcast tower, you're going into another area where the coverage of the previous one disappears, but new broadcasts are becoming available. And you want to know this without interrupting the audio service that you're listening to. So you need 2 tuners, for example. Yeah. We've been working on dual antenna solutions to improve the reception and increase the coverage. Then digital radio came in with DAB. And recently, we also have IP in the car. And again, also for DAB, you can work with multiple tuners to improve the experience from both a performance perspective, reception, and the way it looks like. And if you then look at a radio, and this is a pretty normal configuration that we have these days, you see 1 AM, 3 FM receivers, 4 DAB receivers, and IP. And you all have to manage that. And you can understand that that makes a radio in a car quite different from a radio as a consumer radio. But what you also see is that the time span over which this innovation is happening is ever accelerating. And that is also an important one to understand. It has been accelerating, and you can expect that anything in the car will accelerate even further and faster in the current future or in the coming future. And we are following that. Like we said, we have been thinking about what the car is doing in the future, and we are putting that into our chips. Because Is this then the car of the future, where you're sitting in an autonomous driving car and you're watching a screen, and your entertainment will be different and your entertainment needs will be different? You have big displays that you're watching. So there will also be new competition to broadcast radio, but we do believe that radio is going to be there in the future. Emergency warnings, as mentioned before in several presentations, are a very important aspect, but it's also the entertainment that it brings, the live content. And I think DAB+, and we are convinced that DAB+, is a great solution to go along with what's happening in the car and to be there in the future cars that could be autonomous driving. And that's still further out, but it offers great innovation possibilities, it upgrades the user experience, and it's one great way to move along with that innovation that's happening in the world. Now, looking at how cars are being sold, they are sold globally. So an OEM that develops a car or a car platform that goes into all different locations in the world. And the world is not just AM, FM, or just DAB. From a digital radio perspective, there are multiple standards. And that is also a dynamic picture, so this might not even be the latest view. But you know that in the US, there's HD radio, we have DAB. In Europe and Australia, we have China with their own CDR version. We see DRM happening in India. And yeah, the cars and the OEMs, they have to deal with that. They don't want to reinvent the wheel and reinvent different radios for the different regions, which means that that one car needs to go and be capable of receiving AM, FM, and HD radio in US, DAB plus AM and FM in Europe, DRM plus AM and FM in India, and CDR and AM and FM in China, for example. So it needs to be multi-standard, whatever they design. It needs to be a single car platform, and the software aspects in that are also important, because that is the way how we as NXP have come up with a solution for this. We have defined one chip, which is a global one chip that supports all these different standards, all these digital radio standards, but also AM, FM, onto one piece of silicon. And that one piece of silicon is being used by the tier ones, where they develop the radio just once. From a hardware perspective, they develop it, they validate it, and they qualify it for those lifetimes and these extreme conditions that I mentioned before. And that is then going into the car OEMs, who also have to run that validation once from a hardware perspective. And of course, they have to do their different field trials throughout the different regions. But it cleans up their logistics and their assembly into a very easy way of working. And in the end, the same car platform can go into all these different regions using the chips that NXP is designing here. Now, coming to a conclusion, innovations in car will change the behavior of the listener. And that is something that we really all have to realize, and that will bring in new competition. And that innovation and those changes will go faster and faster. So I would really advise, don't wait with that innovation. But the nice answer here is, and the good thing is that moving towards digital radio, and especially the DAB+, is really a great opportunity to go along with these innovations. It brings way more content as seen, the emergency broadcast, the nice additions with metadata as mentioned before. And of course, NXP serves all of that by offering the ideal products for these global car radio solutions. And that brings me to an end. Thank you for your time, and back to Les.
Thanks, Ron. Very interesting indeed. You've got a few questions from me coming yet. But before we do that, before we do Q&A, I'd like to now switch over from car receivers to home receivers. And we have a presentation from Albert Tseng. He's the CEO of Keystone Semiconductors. He's done this via video. So I think, Shri, let's hand over to that and play that, please.
The topic I want to share with you today is provide affordable DAB receivers locally in shortest time. My name is Albert. I am the CEO of Keystone Semiconductor Corporation from Taiwan. To launch DAB industry successfully, the most important thing is you must let as much people as possible to own DAB receivers in the shortest time. From your mind, you will think, how does our country establish local DAB receiver industry in the shortest time? First, you must choose a cost-effective DAB engine. What is a good DAB engine? It must be fully standard compliant. It must have high integration. You have OFDM decoder, AAC plus decoder, and the peripheral controllers. Besides that, you need built-in processors for customers to design codes. You do not need to have another processor to do that. Then you must have enough GPIO pins to accommodate various customer needs. All these functions must be integrated into a single chip. And because DAB has a very high sensitivity, as low as minus 102 dBm, therefore it is vulnerable to noise. So you must protect it carefully in the module so that they won't be influenced by the noise generated by other components. There is a standard called tick mark to assure the quality of the DAB receiver is good enough. The blue curve is the minimum requirement, and the red curve is the actual measurement. The lower the actual measurement, the better is the performance. The gap between the blue line and the red line is called the margin. The bigger the margin, the better the performance. Second, you must choose a good total solution partner. They must train your engineers. They must provide abundant hardware and software design references. There is a variety of DAB receivers. You have kitchen radio, living radio, car radio. Also, the functions can range from basic to color display to hybrid. And in Asia, it is even more important to have local character support. They must also help you review circuit design and layout. They need to help you test it to assure the quality. Test is very important. So to do the test, you must have affordable signal generator. Our recommendation is Sabers. Sabers has 4 modes. First, it can operate in standalone mode. It can be held in your hand. In connection mode, it can be connected to a PC, so you have a more sophisticated UI. And in network mode, your factory may be on this site where your receivers are tested. Here you can see the Saber is very small. It lies on beside the telephone. And your engineers are in another building. So long as they are connected by internet, then your engineers can use their MB, use the software on their MB to remotely control the Sabers in the factory. Then you have the auto test mode. Auto test is important. You can have it to test for you automatically overnight. Keystone is a good choice because it is proven by Pioneer, Sharp, Philips, Engine, etc. It has rich experience. Millions of Keystone chips has already been shipped. It is located in Taiwan. You know, Taiwan has over 650,000 of migrants from Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Myanmar, Cambodia, etc. Therefore, we could have engineers who can speak your language to support it. Thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you, Albert, for that presentation on home products. It's pretty clear that I think from the last two presentations that receiver advances are quite advanced these days. So that's a good thing for products. We heard from Patrick that the price is down to $20 in some cases for cheaper products. So it's a very affordable receiver technology or broadcasting technology. Okay, we've got a couple of questions. I will throw some of these out to the team here and see who would like to take them. So the first one is it true the robustness of the DAB plus signal reception is better than FM radio, even though DAB plus uses a higher frequency band? Anyone take that one on?
Well, I'll give it a go. Well, yeah, I mean, the frequency obviously has some impact in terms of the margin. We talk about higher frequencies travel less far, but the difference between FM as a reception, the modulation of FM, the modulation of DAB are really quite different. So, in fact, a DAB receiver will be able to demodulate a signal at a lower power level, a lower energy level than an FM receiver can. So the difference also obviously is with the failure point. With an FM radio, you will go through various sort of stages of noise and so on, where the audio signal is disturbed as the signal becomes too weak. With a digital signal, the signal will be in perfect condition until the point when it disappears. So it's two different mechanisms, but the frequency between FM in sort of 100 megahertz and DAB at 200 megahertz, it's not really a big difference in terms of frequency change. So I would say yes, it's more robust, but it's more robust not because of the frequency. It's more robust because of the modulation technique.
Thanks, Lindsay. That's very good. Okay, we've now got one on ASO. And this one says, once ASO completed for FM radio in the future, does it mean that the FM band can be considered to deploy DAB plus radio as well?
Shall I take that one?
Yeah, sure.
I think the short answer is there aren't enough people who would want to have DAB plus to put it onto FM. I mean, frankly, there's plenty of capacity on in band 3. So that's number one. Number two, Lindsay, I think I'm right in saying that right now that there is no technical solution for DAB in band 2. So there are practical limitations to it.
Yeah, I mean, the issue with spectrum obviously also is that spectrum ultimately, it's up to the national administration to decide what services go in which band. And currently, there are an awful lot of countries who still have FM radio in the FM band, 87 to 108 megahertz. It would take a lot of planning between different countries in order to reassign that spectrum. But ultimately, it could be that it was reassigned to, again, to broadcast sound, and DAB would be a technical solution. It will work in that band. The only thing is that receivers are not designed at the moment to receive in that band because there is, frankly, no real chance of deploying DAB into the FM band at this time.
Yeah, very good, very good. Well, in most countries, FM band is completely congested, and there's no real space for anyone new even. So that sort of helps. There's always a crossover period, But we have one other question on the ASO topic as well, and that is, why are countries that have DAB Plus not starting to turn off their FM?
I'll take that one again. I mean, well, the first thing to say is that, Les, as you mentioned, Norway has switched off, and Switzerland is going to switch off between 22 and 23. I think the key reason is people want to migrate slowly, and what they don't want to do is to lose, is to switch off signals and risk losing listeners until they're ready. So what we're seeing is Norway. A lot of it was driven by cost. The cost of having two networks, particularly national networks, in a very mountainous terrain, was quite expensive. So they had a real incentive to switch off. If you look at the UK, they're more relaxed about having the dual transmission costs, and what they don't want to do is to lose listeners prematurely.
Sure. Okay, that's a good answer. We've almost to our end of our time, but I want to ask one more question. I think maybe, Joan, you could field this one. And the question is, with the efficient applications on mobile phones, are people interested in radio?
Advanced and quite sophisticated radio market in Australia. People are using their mobile phones to listen. Majority of listening in Australia, even though we've got a very good 4G network and soon to be 5G, majority of listening is still via broadcast, because broadcast is free, broadcast is everywhere, and particularly in the car, in the car, to make a good hybrid experience is essential for the future of radio. But broadcast, in our view in Australia, for the long term will still be around. And in fact, in talking to buying broadcast, we can't see ourselves not buying broadcast in the medium to want to buy advertising in my phones, but the mobile networks are not good enough and not robust enough to ensure that we will always have coverage and always have delivery. So as far as we're concerned, in Australia, you need a combination of broadcast and the best, and you need a combination of streaming, so you need to be in podcasting. So you need to be everywhere, but you cannot give up broadcast. And we found that with our recent floods, broadcast was still working, and that's the message. Not through a mobile phone network, because most of those had gone down through overuse or through
Okay, very good, very good. Okay, I've got one last one, and the question is, what about 5G broadcast for future competition? Anyone want to take that, or shall I take that?
Maybe I can say a couple of words.
Okay, Ron, please do.
Can I just say it would be good to have a 5G network that worked before we even think about 5G taking over from broadcasting.
Yeah.
And a 5G network that works everywhere. Areas. So let's be realistic.
Yeah, and I think Joan is absolutely right there, and especially in cars, this is sometimes really terrible, because when you lose connection sometimes for half a minute to a minute, and that is something that the user is really killing for the user experience, to be honest. But let's face it, it's going to be there, and that's also why a lot of car makers are supporting hybrid radio these days, and it's not even 5G, it's 4G or 3G, and that works. But you have to have a good solution, and I'm convinced that broadcast will be there as well, and that will be usually the main reception that you will have in cars, definitely.
Good stuff, good stuff. All right, I want to end on a note. We've talked a bit about cars, we've talked a lot about cars, and I want to just make sure that the audience is aware that there is a a significant workshop coming up in June, the WorldDAB Automotive Workshop, on the 23rd of June. And I would ask everyone, if you're interested in automotive, go to the WorldDAB website and get some more information on that event. It's free to attend. I'm not exactly sure of the format at this point in time, but I do know that it's usually very well attended, and it's got all of the top organisations and people in the automotive industry going. So a top event for this year. So, okay, with that, I think we'll close the session. Thank you, audience, for attending. I think we had over 100 people attending today, so that's great. And if you've got any other questions, certainly ping them through on the email to the project office at WorldDAB, or you can use my email if you wish, and I will pass them on, or if I can't answer them. So with that, thank you to our speakers. Thank you, Joan. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Ron. And thank you, Albert, in his absenteeism. And thank you to the ABU team for putting this all together for us. It's been a great job, and I think some really good presentations. So thank you, everyone. And on that, I'll say cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
See ya.